Welcome to the deep dive. So our mission today is to, well, really examine the hidden mechanics and the dramatic transformations happening inside the North American trucking industry.
Yeah, it is a huge topic, and we've got some really interesting source material for it.
We do. We are looking at a pretty detailed interview transcript from the Tucker Carlson show. And his guest is Gord McGill, who's a third-generation trucker and the author of this book called End of the Road: Inside the War on Truckers.
Right, and before we really get into it, we should probably throw out a quick disclaimer for you listening.
Yes, absolutely. So you should know up front that the source material we are unpacking today, it contains some highly politically charged viewpoints.
Very charged, yeah.
Right, and rhetoric from both the interviewer and the guest, especially regarding, immigration, national security, and government policies.
Yeah.
So to be unequivocally clear, we are not taking sides here.
Exactly. We are definitely not endorsing these political views.
No, not at all. Our goal is strictly to impartially unpack and analyze the claims and the facts presented in this specific text. We just want to understand this very particular perspective on our global supply chain.
And it's a perspective that it really shatters that romanticized image of the American trucker. Like, we all know that classic 1970s trope, right?
Oh, yeah, the lone cowboy of the highway.
Exactly. The lone cowboy with the CB radio, totally autonomous, answering to absolutely no one. Well, McGill argues that culture is it's been completely eradicated.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we are looking at a system that McGill claims is now dominated by what he calls spreadsheet brains.
Yeah, a landscape of heavily monitored, exploited labor.
Right, and digital dispatchers sitting halfway across the globe. So to really grasp how an industry that's so central to the American identity arrived at this highly contentious state, the source material rewinds the clock.
It goes back to a massive economic pivot in the 1980s.
Specifically, the Motor Carrier Act of 1980.
Right. So the 1980 Act, it effectively deregulated the entire trucking industry because prior to this, the industry operated under a really highly regulated framework. It was actually somewhat similar to a public utility.
Almost like a taxi medallion system, right?
Exactly like that. If you wanted to run a trucking business, you needed operating authority from the government. Routes were protected, rates were published, and, the barrier to entry was pretty high.
And the intention behind deregulation was to dismantle what was basically viewed as a cartel.
Yeah, the goal was introducing free market competition to drive down shipping prices for consumers.
I mean, I understand the economic theory there. More competition usually means lower prices, right?
Yeah.
But McGill argues the reforms swung the pendulum so violently that it just triggered a complete race to the bottom.
Yeah, suddenly those protective medallions were basically worthless.
Right. As he puts it in the interview, anyone with $300 in a pulse to just sign up and become a trucking company overnight.
Which is wild.
It is wild. The market was instantly flooded with these undercapitalized owner-operators who were just desperate for freight. And that drove rates so low that veteran drivers simply couldn't survive on the new pay structures.
Well, yeah, because when you shatter the profit margins of an entire sector, you inevitably shatter the wages of the workers inside it.
Makes total sense.
And when wages plummet, you lose your experienced workforce. So this created a massive problem for the major corporate carriers who actually survived that initial bloodbath. They suddenly found themselves completely unable to attract enough drivers willing to work for those depressed wages.
See, I'm struggling with the economic logic of what happens next. In a normal free market, if a company can't attract talent, it has to raise its wages.
Right, that's basic economics.
But instead of self-correcting, the industry took a totally different route. So in 1987, the American Trucking Associations, the ATA, they released this study claiming that by 1990, a shortage of 600,000 truckers was going to cause the entire U.S. economy to just collapse.
Yeah, and McGill forcefully asserts that this was just a fabricated narrative. I mean, spoiler alert, the economy did not collapse in 1990.
Right.
But that narrative of a massive driver shortage, it took root. It became this undisputed talking point in the media and in Congress for decades. And he argues this narrative was designed with a highly specific, highly lucrative purpose.
To get taxpayers to foot the bill, basically.
Exactly, to get taxpayers to subsidize the training of new drivers. By convincing the government that this national crisis was imminent, corporate lobbying groups successfully secured federal and state funding for what McGill calls CDL mills.
CDL mills, right?
Yeah, schools designed to just rapidly churn out commercial driver's licenses.
So the claim is that there is absolutely no driver shortage at all. There are Millions of people holding CDLs in the United States today.
Millions, yeah.
What there actually is, according to the source, is a massive retention problem. I mean, McGill points out that some large corporate carriers see an annual driver turnover rate of 90 to 100%.
Which is just an unbelievable statistic.
It's crazy. Drivers get into the industry, they experience the brutal reality of the pay structure, and they quit almost immediately. And the biggest culprit he points to is something called detention time.
Ah, yes, detention time.
Right, which is the hours a driver spends sitting at a warehouse just waiting for their trailer to be loaded or unloaded. In most cases, because drivers are paid per mile driven, that waiting time is completely unpaid.
What's fascinating here is framing a profound labor retention problem as a labor shortage is just a brilliant piece of economic sleight of hand.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if a company admits it has a 100% turnover rate because it refuses to pay its workers for detention time, well, the market dictates that the company should bear the cost of fixing its own toxic workplace.
Right, they'd have to pay more.
Exactly. But by rebranding it as a national shortage, the industry shifts the financial burden of recruiting and training constant replacements entirely onto the taxpayer.
It's basically like running a hospital where the doctors keep quitting because the operating rooms are toxic and the hours are impossible.
Yeah.
But instead of paying to clean the rooms and improve the conditions, the hospital board just lobbies the government to lower the passing grade on the medical exam.
Wow, yeah.
That way, they can just flood the hallways with cheaper, government-subsidized interns to replace the highly skilled surgeons walking out the door.
That analogy hits the underlying mechanics perfectly. Because if your entire business model relies on a constant, unending churn of inexperienced, entry-level labor, you eventually run into a hard physical limitation.
Because you can't train them fast enough.
Right. You cannot put millions of people through grueling, specialized mechanical training fast enough to replace the veterans who are quitting. So the industry had to change the machinery itself to lower the bar.
You have to de-skill the profession.
Yeah, as I said.
And McGill uses the shift to automatic transmissions in big rigs as a prime example of this.
Yeah.
The standard corporate PR line is that automatic transmissions were introduced primarily for, fuel efficiency and emission standards.
Which sounds great on paper.
Right. But McGill argues the intentional driving force was actually to dramatically lower the barrier to entry. If you don't have to teach a recruit how to feather the clutch on a complex 16-speed manual transmission while hauling 80,000 pounds down a mountain.
You can push them through a taxpayer-funded CDL mill in a fraction of the time.
Exactly.
You are systematically removing the need for deep mechanical mastery of the machine. And the source contrasts this modern, de-skilled reality with the extreme competency of legacy truckers.
Right, like his grandfather.
Yeah. McGill shares stories of his grandfather driving across the frozen Trans-Canada Highway in 1960, literally sleeping across the seats with no auxiliary heater.
That is just intense.
Right. And he details his own experience doing 4 seasons of ice road trucking in the Northwest Territories. We're talking about operating a massive machine at 53 degrees below zero.
Wow.
Working outside to fix a trailer in temperatures that would freeze human skin in minutes and coordinating with ground-penetrating radar units just to make sure the ice doesn't swallow the truck whole.
I mean, that level of situational awareness and mechanical self-reliance is actively being stripped away just to turn human beings into easily manageable, easily replaceable cogs.
Exactly.
And the ultimate tool for managing those cogs sits right on the dashboard. In 2017, the federal government mandated electronic logging devices, or ELDs, in almost every commercial truck.
Yeah, the ELD mandate?
These were sold to the public entirely as a safety measure, right? To strictly regulate and track how many hours a driver is legally allowed to operate.
But the source cites a study by Overdrive Online showing that safety metrics actually worsened following the ELD mandate.
Wait, they worsened?
Yeah, they got worse. And to understand why, you have to look at how the mandate interacts with the underlying economic incentives. These drivers are still being paid strictly by the mile.
Oh, right, because of the unpaid detention time.
Exactly. So if you hit a traffic jam or get held up at a warehouse for unpaid detention time, your rigid 14-hour digital clock just keeps ticking down. You are burning the only hours you are legally allowed to work without moving an inch or making a single dime.
That sounds incredibly stressful.
It is. So when the road finally clears, every single mile becomes a desperate high-speed race against that digital clock just to make a living wage.
So you are basically legislating compliance without changing the economic reality that a delayed driver is an unpaid driver.
Precisely.
And the workarounds drivers are using to beat that digital clock are just wild. I want to spend a minute on the mechanics of this, because McGill explains how these supposedly secure government-mandated ELDs are being openly hacked.
Yeah, this part is pretty crazy.
A driver sitting in a truck in Iowa can send a message via the Telegram app to a dispatcher sitting in a boiler room overseas, say, in Belgrade, Serbia. Like, how does a guy in Serbia change a secure device in Iowa?
Well, it exploits the back-end architecture of the ELD systems. See, the devices are designed with a dispatch portal so fleet managers can monitor their trucks and correct legitimate administrative errors in the logs.
Okay, that makes sense.
But these overseas dispatchers are given fleet manager credentials. So when the driver texts them on Telegram, the dispatcher logs into the back end of the system and artificially rewrites the driver's logged hours, pushing them from driving into off-duty status.
So the driver just keeps blasting down the highway, but if a roadside enforcement officer pulls them over, the app on the dashboard looks completely clean and perfectly legal.
Right.
The officer has absolutely no way to see the back-end manipulation happening from a server in Eastern Europe.
Exactly. The technology designed to enforce safety compliance is being actively subverted by the very economic pressures it was supposed to control, which creates a massive vulnerability in the regulatory system.
So when you de-skill the job, depress the wages, and create an environment so toxic that domestic workers refuse to tolerate the churn, you run out of Americans willing to sit in the cab.
You do.
So who is actually filling these seats?
Yeah.
This brings us to some of the most highly controversial claims in the source material.
Right. And just a gentle reminder for you listening, we need to remember we are looking at this strictly through McGill's specific lens regarding immigration policy, labor exploitation, and safety.
Good point. So McGill details the operation of what he calls the donkey route.
Yeah, the donkey route. It's a sophisticated human smuggling pipeline where foreign nationals, frequently from the Punjab region of India, travel through Central American countries to reach the U.S. border.
Okay.
According to the interview, upon claiming asylum, these individuals are processed and frequently issued work authorizations without comprehensive vetting of their driving or criminal backgrounds in their home countries.
And McGill claims that once authorized, many of these individuals are immediately funneled into trucking companies, often owned by co-ethnic operators who really understand the loopholes of the American system.
Right, and the stakes for these new unvetted drivers are astronomically high.
They aren't just trying to make a living, right?
No, they are allegedly put into these trucks to quickly pay off massive debts to the human smugglers' debts that can exceed $30,000.
Wow, $30,000.
Yeah.
That level of desperation, that debt, it introduces a profound level of risk into the operation of commercial vehicles.
Absolutely. McGill argues this influx of exploited labor has directly coincided with the dangerous erosion of basic federal safety standards.
Like the language rule?
Yes, a glaring example he provides involves language proficiency. So since 1937, there has been a federal regulation requiring commercial drivers to have a working command of the English language.
Which makes sense. A driver must be able to comprehend construction warnings, communicate with law enforcement, read critical safety signs.
But McGill points out that in 2016, the enforcement of that rule was essentially gutted. The government stopped putting non-English speaking drivers out of service, opting instead to just hand out minor fines to the companies.
And the human consequences of putting untrained, non-English speaking drivers into massive machines are tragic.
They really are.
The source highlights a highly publicized incident at Wolf Creek Pass in Colorado. A foreign driver, lacking the ability to read English warning signs, bypassed multiple massive bright yellow signs indicating a runaway truck ramp ahead.
All right.
When his brakes failed on the steep, treacherous mountain grade, he didn't know what the ramp was for or that he needed to use it. He bypassed the ramp entirely and was killed in the resulting catastrophic crash.
It's awful. And McGill emphasizes repeatedly that these migrant drivers are victims of a predatory system. They are being profoundly exploited by the companies employing them.
Yeah, the human cost is massive.
He notes a recent search on a crowdfunding site that revealed 250 active GoFundMe campaigns specifically set up for Indian truck drivers' families.
250, that is devastating.
Yeah, these are campaigns desperately trying to raise money to repatriate human remains or pay catastrophic medical bills following severe crashes. The workers are thrown into complex, dangerous machines with minimal training and insurmountable debt hanging over their heads.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. From a purely bureaucratic standpoint, I have to ask, How is this legally functioning?
Right. How does it happen?
How can completely unvetted, untrained individuals just walk in and legally secure a license to operate an 80,000-pound missile on an American interstate? Where are the state DMVs in all of this? Are they just looking the other way?
Well, the source material asserts that the regulatory guardrails are failing at the state level, driven by an overwhelming economic demand for cheap labor that crosses all party lines.
Really? All party lines?
Yeah, McGill claims that Texas, a staunchly conservative state, is actually the #1 state in the country for issuing non-domiciled commercial driver's licenses to foreign nationals.
Wow, I wouldn't have guessed that.
He also points to widespread documented cases of corruption and bribery at local DMVs in states like Florida, where examiners have been caught taking cash to push unvetted drivers through the CDL testing process without actually testing their mechanical competency.
So the DMV safety nets are compromised, the digital logs are being actively hacked from Serbia, and the drivers themselves are victims of human smuggling rings.
That's the picture he's painting.
If the entire foundation of the logistics network is this chaotic and fraught with fraud, why isn't the corporate supply chain completely collapsed?
Well, McGill's answer is that the corporate structure at the very top of the industry has brilliantly evolved to insulate itself from the chaos it relies on.
Which brings us to the power-only model.
Exactly. He points specifically to this ubiquitous corporate strategy known as the power-only model. This is the structural mechanism currently utilized by massive logistics giants like Amazon, J.B. Hunt, and countless others.
The mechanics of the power-only model are fascinating. Basically, the massive, recognizable American megacorporation owns the trailer and the freight inside it.
Right.
But they do not own the truck pulling it, and they do not employ the driver. They subcontract the power. It's like these massive logistics companies are walking around wearing an American corporate skin suit.
A skin suit, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, the public sees the trusted, smiling brand logo on the side of the trailer, but underneath that suit, the company is relying entirely on a shadow network of cheap, insulated, subcontracted labor.
And this structural separation allows the major corporations to completely divorce themselves from the liability, the compliance costs, and the human messiness of the industry.
So they don't take the hit if something goes wrong.
Right. If a subcontracted truck driven by an exhausted, unvetted driver gets into a horrific crash, the parent company's brand and legal liability are largely buffered. The subcontractor takes the fall.
But the subcontractors themselves have developed mechanisms to dodge accountability. McGill calls them chameleon carriers.
Right, chameleon carriers.
When a small subcontracted carrier racks up too many safety violations, the Department of Transportation is supposed to revoke their operating authority. But the DOT system is tracking the LLC's registration number, not necessarily the VINs of the trucks or the identity of the beneficial owner.
Exactly, it's a loophole.
So when the DOT shuts them down, the operator simply dissolves that specific LLC, registers a brand new one under a relative's name the next morning, transfers the exact same trucks and the exact same drivers over, and receives a fresh DOT number with a perfectly clean safety record.
It is a massive bureaucratic shell game.
Really is.
And that shell game extends into realms that implicate national security. Because of this chaotic, opaque subcontracting network, McGill claims that unvetted foreign nationals operating under these chameleon carriers are frequently bypassing security regulations to haul United States Postal Service mail and even sensitive U.S. military freight between bases.
When you connect the dots on that, it is genuinely alarming. We discussed earlier how the ELDs are constantly tracking the trucks and how those devices have back-end portals accessible by overseas dispatchers.
Right. Hacking from Serbia we talked about.
Exactly. When you combine that hacking vulnerability with military freight, you have massive intelligence hemorrhage. All the metadata regarding the locations of military bases, the timing of sensitive shipments, the weight and type of loads being hauled.
All of that is being pumped into digital devices that are actively monitored by dispatch offices in Moldova, Serbia, or India.
This raises an important question, doesn't it?
It really does. It raises a fundamental question of sovereignty. What happens to the security of a nation when its most critical physical infrastructure, the literal movement of its goods, its mail, and its military assets, is outsourced to a completely unaccountable, untrackable shadow network manipulated by foreign entities?
It is an incredible thread to pull. So today, we've tracked a trajectory that began with the deregulation of the 1980s, which stripped away middle-class protections and crushed driver wages.
Yeah.
We saw how the corporate response wasn't to improve conditions, but to fabricate a shortage narrative to secure taxpayer funding for CDL mills.
Which required the intentional de-skilling of the American trucker.
Right, leading directly to today's reality.
Yeah.
A highly fragile system propped up by exploited migrant labor, easily manipulated digital tracking, and corporate shell games designed to evade all liability.
It is a comprehensive breakdown of how an industry optimized for absolute lowest cost labor inevitably sacrifices competency, public safety, and national security in the process.
So if you are driving on the interstate today, you really need to keep this context in mind. This abstract policy discussion touches your life every time you merge onto a highway with your family.
Exactly.
It is the hidden human cost, the exploitation, the exhaustion, and the danger behind every single package that seamlessly arrives on your front porch.
The frictionless convenience we experience at the end of the supply chain masks a tremendous amount of unseen, systemic volatility.
And it leaves me with one final lingering thought to mull over. We've spent this entire deep dive talking about how corporations have spent decades trying to turn human beings into cheap, compliant, easily replaceable machines.
Right, through de-skilling, automatic transmissions, rigid digital ELD tracking.
But what happens when the technology advances just one step further and fully autonomous, driverless trucks hit the interstates at scale?
Oh, wow.
Will removing the human element entirely finally solve these massive issues of labor exploitation and highway safety? Or will it just introduce an entirely new nightmare? A nightmare of systemic fragility, mass hacking of 80,000-pound autonomous missiles, and a total unbreakable corporate monopoly over our public roads.
Definitely something to think about the next time you're passing an 18-wheeler.